You sort of mentioned the possibility that such things could be more of an accommodation, possibly. Again, we don't know the hearts of men, as you said, but the idea that such actions could be more of a political accommodation than an honest change. And on that note, we've already discussed religion affecting politics. What is your opinion on how politics in America can affect religious practice?
And we've had, historically, of course, we know that politics and policies have shaped. One of the things, for example, I would say, is that, and I'll give one example. I would say that when I think, for example, the role of women in ecclesiastical traditions, let's say the role of women in the church, okay, not in every instance, but there has been substantial evidence to show that the manner in which society has moved in terms of equality, in terms of voting, in terms of the voice of women in our society as playing an important role, has also shaped the manner in which many churches, for example, have over the last several decades have voted to allow women to become ministers, to become pastors, to become leaders in church. Obviously, there are still some that don't, but many that have not just done that because they have had some kind of epiphany. I think part of it has to do with the manner in which our society has changed, which maybe some policies have been established that have shaped the manner in which the church, in which religious institutions see the world. And I think along the way they have been forced, if you will, to rethink perhaps the roles of certain people or certain ideas, if you will. One could certainly talk about slavery in this regard as well. In other words, sometimes it is the case that what society does absolutely shapes religious traditions and the practice of certain religious beliefs.
Within tax code, churches, temples, and various other similar religious institutions are exempt from paying certain taxes. Now, that said, does that inherently violate the Establishment Clause? And if they are exempt from those taxes, they can still donate money or endorse a candidate's campaign. Is it really valid for them to be able to do that if they are exempt from those taxes?
Well, and let me be upfront. I'm no IRS tax authority. However, I think there are certain things, for example, that if one, as let's say a member of the clergy, begins to tell his or her congregation or the group over which they have some kind of power and control, that this is who you should vote for. This is the candidate that we as a group support. And that becomes part, if you will, not behind closed doors necessarily, but part of the public discourse. I think you have just entered an arena there, in my view, that crosses the line. On the other hand, on both sides of the fence, on the other hand, if I were speaking in a church and I have inclinations towards the left, I would absolutely want to speak about social justice. I would, by the way, everyone should speak about social justice if you ask me, because I think it's part of the fabric of religious traditions. But I would speak about that. I would speak about social welfare. I would speak about equality. I would speak of the importance of choice. I could speak about all of those things, and I could speak about those things really very easily, I think, within the biblical tradition. But I could also say, as you think about this election, and I could be very coy about it, and I could say, these are the things we hold to be important as a people. Choose wisely. Or, on the other hand, I could say, as a congregation, we are profoundly, deeply committed to pro-life. As a congregation, we believe that the individual is what is the pillar. As a congregation, we extol the virtues of family and the nuclear family. And therefore, as this election comes, choose wisely. If you do that, I would have a difficult time saying you have done anything improper. But for me, that's also sort of navigating carefully around the edges. And right now, it is set up that those who want to speak about these matters have to do so while navigating carefully around the edges. That's the way it's set up. Here's the thing. I do not know if I were a minister, a priest, a pastor, and I'm speaking about prophetic justice and the importance of caring for the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized and the voiceless. I think it's profoundly biblical. And I would not want the government to say, you may not do that because that sounds remarkably, I don't know, left of center. Actually, it's very biblical. So how one does this, I think, perhaps becomes, it sounds as if, one is playing a little bit of a game here, but how one does this become an issue. And I think we've had some people who are very clever. Now some people have become very belligerent who have said, I will speak whatever I want to speak because God has called me to do that. That's a little bogus, I think. And therefore the government cannot tell me what I don't think the government is really telling you what to speak. But if you choose, for example, to really allow yourself to become a megaphone for a particular group, a particular party, I don't think anyone is going to say that you can't do that. However, I don't think you can then claim to still have this sort of protection from, if you will, that tax exemption allows you to have. You can't have it both ways, but you can sort of, I don't know, go around the edges. And I think frankly, I think most do. Most do.
You mentioned earlier in one of your comments that people will say that this is a Christian nation and was founded to be a Christian nation. Were the founding fathers Christian in the sense that we often think of modern Christians?
Well, I mean, it's an important question, but even the question itself, I would want to say, well, what does it mean to speak of a modern Christian? Because we have, I think, probably millions of modern Christians in this country, many of whom do not see a lot of things in common. But I'd like to think all of whom, I shouldn't say all, but I'd like to think most of whom are driven by ideals that are virtuous, let's say. Now, to speak about the founding fathers that are Christian, my first question, again, would be, and maybe I just like these large questions, would be, please tell me what that means. If, and I'm by the way, and if I were in a debate, I would absolutely cede my time to my opponent to explain what that means. I wish we would have some of that, because what we have are these large sweeping statements without any kind of definition as to what this means. Here is what I would say. Do I believe that our founding fathers were overwhelmingly theists? No. Not because I said that, but because they have claimed that. They're the worldview. Even the language of our founding fathers gives this, I believe, erroneous suggestion that they were all of one, that this was a monolithic group. They were not. I mean, many of the people who speak of the founding fathers, do they really want to carry around the Jefferson Bible as their own? So this idea of let's speak of all of the group as one, actually, to me, is really a remarkably simplistic sort of idea. This proposition that we can speak of all of our founding fathers as theistic and cut from the same piece of cloth, and therefore not in unity. I don't think when that statement is made, it's made in the sense that they're all united. I think the statement is made in the sense that they all uniformly believe the same thing, and that's what we've inherited. I don't think so. In fact, I know that that's not the case.
It seems like a lot of times when people will go back to making references to the founding fathers, they will treat these group of they were just men, and they will I guess you would say put them on a pedestal, but you have to remember that Washington and Jefferson were some of the wealthiest slave owners in the world at the time. Yet they always seem to be put on the pedestal for founding the Christian nation. When you look at their lives, they were as human as anyone else.
And to me, that's part of the thing, that who we are is constituted not by one component. None of us are that one-dimensional. We are layered. We have, listen, let me use a metaphor here. All of us human beings, all of us, maybe there are some who would take issue with this, and they're entitled. But I believe all of us human beings live in the East of Eden. We live in the East of Eden, and that means, in large part, that we live with different qualities of sort of brokenness. We make our mistakes. We do some things that perhaps range from an oversight that for which I might be, deeply apologetic, to things that are very egregious. But we live in different parts in the East of Eden, and so this idea that I think we begin a very, very tricky and dangerous kind of proposition when we start speaking in such sort of almost ideal ways, and begin to sort of gradually recreate something that never was. Maybe that's why memory is much, much more important than nostalgia in this regard. And it's fine to be nostalgic, for the good old times, until, of course, we have to start really seriously looking at what that meant. It's we live in a world that is not idyllic and perfect, and as human beings, we're the ones that constitute that world. Maybe there are other people who might feel otherwise, but I think we are pretty well lodged in the East of Eden, and how we make that life work